This lecture will look at the government's goal of external stability. So we know at the moment in the current market economy we live in a very globalized world, and therefore transactions between countries are very common. So these transactions include the movement of goods, services, incomes and transfers, and they also involve the flow of investments and money capital both into and out of different countries. So these transactions are recorded annually on the balance of payments account, and we'll talk about the balance of payments in quite a lot of depth in later lectures, and are recorded as credit, money flowing into the economy, or purchasing power flowing into the economy, or debits, where purchasing power is flowing out of the economy. So now we can see how external stability has a direct link with our living standards, because we talk about the purchasing power and how that affects the consumption of goods and services. And since external stability, or the government's goal of external stability, tries to focus on the flow or maintaining a flow of purchasing power in an economy. So the government's goal of external stability is a fairly long one. It is one of the longest definitions pertaining to the different goals. So bear with me while we go through this definition. So it is defined as a desirable situation where Australia is living within its means. And is able to pay off any existing or outstanding international financial obligations or commitments without the burden, and this is done without the burden of high overseas payments causing severe problems that may reduce our material living standards, namely material living standards. But we'll just use living standards as a broad categorization. So this is a fairly long definition. It is a desirable situation where Australia is living within its means and is able to pay off any existing international financial obligations without the burden of high overseas payments causing severe problems that may reduce our living standards. And this is typically measured by 3 pillars. It is measured by a low CAD to GDP ratio, often around 3 or 4%. A stable dollar, or AUD, and also sustainable net foreign debt. I will go through each of these one by one now. Okay, so why is it preferable that we have a low CAD to GDP ratio? So we know that the CAD represents the excess value of total debits over total credits for goods plus services plus primary incomes plus secondary income. So this reflects the current account deficit. So it is the excess or the surplus in imports over exports plus secondary incomes plus net transfers. This can be a very complicated process to understand, but we'll go through the current account in more depth in the lecture, primarily given to the current account. And so, as a very rough guide, this is around 3 to 4% GDP. So a bigger CAD means, because the CAD is primarily caused by, say, income payments and net exports, a bigger CAD or a large CAD means imports are greater than exports. And that's bad because that represents a flow of purchasing power away from the economy. And it also means that net income is less than zero. And this is because we're paying more in interest payments to overseas borrowers. And that's bad because the income that would have been inside the economy and used for domestic production or consumption is flowing out of the economy. And both these represent a flow of purchasing power from the economy. Secondly, we have what is known as the stable dollar. So we don't want the dollar to be too volatile because we want farmers or exporters to plan ahead. So we don't want a volatile dollar. We want a steady dollar. We're going to give that a tick because we want a steady dollar so people can plan ahead. And we don't want a volatile dollar. So a volatile dollar is a cross. And this has generally the same concept falling behind inflation rate. We don't want a high or volatile inflation rate. We want the inflation rate to stay steady. This is because it allows people to plan ahead and therefore save or consume more now if they have a relatively stable view of what would happen in the future. It also means a stable dollar means that exporters would benefit because then they could plan ahead or plan production ahead so that they remain relatively competitive. So it is good for exporters. Good for exporters. We'll just denote that X for exporters, not the cross sign, but the X for exporters. And lastly, we want to have a sustainable net foreign debt. Firstly, we need to know that debt is not always bad. If debt for investment purposes is a good thing because we're expanding our national production. But debt to pay off debt is a bad thing. So if we're borrowing to pay off the current debt that we have, that's a very bad thing because we're moving in a vicious cycle that we're going to keep on piling on our debt, and therefore our net foreign debt will increase even more. But a net foreign debt that is designed for investment, that is a very good thing because it allows us to increase our productive capacity. This is meant to be investment. Let's make that a little bit clearer. Investment. So debt for investment is a good thing, but debt to pay off debt is a very bad thing. So to recap the goal of external stability, it is a desirable situation where Australia is living within its means and is able to pay off any existing financial obligations. And this is usually characterized by 3 different pillars. 1, a low CAD to GDP ratio, possibly around 3 to 4%. 2, a stable dollar, so people can plan ahead and so therefore our exports become more competitive. And lastly, a sustainable net foreign debt, so that we don't allow businesses and consumers to pile up on the debt, and so that will represent an outflow of purchasing power from the economy if we have to use our incomes to pay off debt rather than to consume goods and services. However, we must note that debt is not always a bad thing. If debt is used to leverage investment, that can be a good thing as we can generate profit or increase efficiency from that. It is only when debt is used to pay off existing debt then it is considered a very bad economic signal. So they're the 3 pillars that frame the goal of external stability. And this is a very important goal that we have to understand. And we'll come back to these 3 concepts or 3 pillars throughout this series of lectures on the goal of external stability.